This is the Working in Hell podcast with your host, Vinny Blasio. Each episode, Vinny takes you inside the world of New York State Corrections, focusing on both corrections officer and law enforcement issues. And now your host, Vinny Blasio.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Vinny Blasio with the Working in Hell podcast. So today we're going to start out with a little video that we got from the Souza Barnowski Correctional Center incident that just happened there on September 21st, I believe was the date. And this is from Lancaster, Massachusetts. So let me play the video, and then we're going to have a special guest. Rick Harcrow is joining us. So we're fortunate enough to have him as our special guest today. But let's get right into the video at this time. As you can see with this video, there is no sound, so it's a 2-minute video, but you can see right here. As you can see, that was the incident from September 21st from, as I said, the Souza Barnowski Correctional Center in Lancaster, Mass. There, the 2 officers suffered stab wounds, and the 3 who responded originally, as you could see, there was inmates that added to the chaos, and they also got injured, and the 1 officer was stabbed 12 times in the back and also suffered a punctured lung. So just wanted to share that with everybody and let you know what's going out there. And obviously, we appreciate your comments and the emails. At this time, we're going to add Mr. Rick Harcrow to the stage. And Rick, how are you?
Good. Good morning, Vin.
Good morning.
It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. And thanks for spending some time with us and giving us your time and spend an hour with us this morning. And were you able to see that video?
Yes.
That is just unbelievable.
Horrific. That shows the dangers that correction officers work at. Whether, I don't know if that's a state prison or a county prison. That's what we deal with every day. That's the reality of what can happen.
Yeah, I believe that was the state, Massachusetts State Prison. It was a maximum security prison in Lancaster and Mass. And it just shows you the difference, that time can make. It's like in 1 minute, everybody seems to be in the rec room and everything seems to be flowing. And then all of a sudden they had a very bad day.
Yes, I watched that on YouTube just recently, briefly. I didn't get to study it, but there was some other man, unknown, total disclaimer, not saying that. A lot of times it looked like the guy was punching him, but he claimed the guy was actually being stabbed, that the guy had a shiv in his hand. There's a common misnomer. Everybody says shank. Shank is supposed to be the verb, the action. You got shanked. But they actually call the homemade knife, as we would know it, is called a shiv, just for the general public out there who wouldn't know that prison slang.
And that's a very good point. And in that, they're claiming the union released that video, which is fortunate because obviously the state wasn't going to release that. And there is a war of words that are going on between Massachusetts Union, the the Correctional Federation, the state federation that represents the correction officers in the state, and the state commissioner. Obviously, they're in a similar role as New York was for the longest time, as having an acting commissioner, but it certainly got the attention and forced the commissioner to do a couple things. They sent in different task force and different resources, unlike New York, which they normally put their head in the sand. But in this, it forced the state of Massachusetts to respond, which was nice. And even though the state did respond and said that they were working with the union, they did quite a few things. Didn't lock down the facility like the union wanted. But there is a war of words that are going on between the two. And the union, even to this day, they put out a press release yesterday saying how unhappy they are still with the management. But even as the disagreement continues, there's still, as you can see from these different incidents that are happening all across the country, is how the agency responds to the officers and how they respond to the representation of the correction officers, whether it be the union or the correction officers themselves. And it just seems that other places throughout the country are having a better time communicating with the agency than it does sometimes in New York State. And Rick, if you would, because you have extensive background in this, if you could just give the listeners and the viewers, for those that are watching it on video, a little history and background, so the general public knows what your role was, not just in corrections itself, but overall the different positions and titles that you've had throughout your career.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm Richard Harcrow. I live outside of Buffalo, New York. I worked for 37 years for the New York State Department of Corrections, which is now called Corrections and Community Supervision. I worked at Attica, the maximum security prison, for most of my career, 30 plus years. In the 37 year, I was also a union president for the New York State Correction Officers for one term. And I was a union, I was the president of the old union. We choose a new union. And I was a president at Attica for the Correction Officers Union. And I have extensive knowledge, and I've worked with correction officials being from Attica all across the country, from California to New York, Rikers Island, San Quentin to Florida, and all points in between. And, I applaud you, Vinny, for putting a podcast out there to show. The problem with corrections is that the public never gets to see what we really do. And they watch these bad B-rated movies where they think all the correction officers are big bad guys that beat people up and throw them in the cells and give them bread and water and put them in solitary confinement, which in New York State and every other state that I've seen, there's no such thing as solitary confinement. There's what they call, in a lot of states, in New York, we call it a special housing unit. In other states, they call it administrative segregation. And these are for the bad guys who won't behave in prison. And that's why we put people in prison, because they won't behave in public. Serious crimes, murder, manslaughter, rape, serious assault. I mean, when we pulled the figures, I was a representative in the state from 2002 to 2005 as the New York State Correction Officers president. 45% of inmates in a maximum security facility were doing time for either murder or manslaughter. And some people were shocked, and I wasn't. That meant almost half in a prison like Attica was 2,200 inmates. So almost half of them, say 1,100, had done time for killing someone. And when you read these horrific acts in the paper or on the news, and you wonder where they end up, they usually end up in state maximum security facilities. And these poor officers, what showed today is everything goes quiet, and then every once in a while, it just blows up, and these officers get assaulted. And in the video for civilians, looks like the guy's punching them. And a lot of times there's correction officers, it looks like a guy's punching. Then when you get close, whether it's an inmate on inmate attack or inmate on officer attack, you found out he was stabbing him once you see the blood. And it's shocking as heck. And I don't care how many years you got on the job. I'd have 30 plus years on the job. They'd be stabbing a guy. And still stress would go right through the roof. And that's just human nature. That's how it's supposed to be. But we really need, the problem with some conventional wisdom of management, corporations, departments, agencies, is to keep things quiet and routine, which is a good system. However, some systems need to listen to the rank and file. You need to actually listen, not go in there with the pre-notion agenda, but to listen to what people are actually saying. You know, they need help. I noticed they didn't carry batons. I noticed if they carry pepper spray, they didn't get a chance to use it. That happens a lot. When you're assaulted, you don't have the time. These inmates don't come up to you and say, hey, come on, I had enough of you. Let's get it on. Let's fight. No, they usually just come up and sucker punch you, as we all know. And you never have time to pull your defensive weapons. And then sometimes even like the pepper spray, there's some inmates we've seen it doesn't affect. So you're spraying, your adrenaline's all pumped up, and they keep fighting like you never even used it. Now, when I got sprayed in New York, when we went to pepper spray, of course, all the officers had to be sprayed in training to show you how the effects were. I can't stand this stuff. Now, one time we gassed the mess hall a few times over the years when the inmates caused disturbances. We had 200, 400 inmates in there. I was running halfway up the hallway to help my friends. And I had to turn around and go back because we didn't have gas masks. We had them in certain areas, but where I was, we had to get the gas masks to go in and get them. So it's, you know, it's a lot more detailed than what the movies show. That's why I wanted to tell people, you know, in Attica, we used to let guys out at 8 o'clock in the morning, you know, and we wouldn't put the back in until like 10 o'clock at night. And then we would run them back and forth to programs. They used to say we'd flip about 2,000 people a day back and forth to school, to the yards, to the mess hall, to the hospital, to visits, and all the other programs that we run. You know, and I was quite impressed with officers all over because most police officers, correction officers are good people. And we actually pulled the figures one time from officers who got in trouble in the union. And I think out of 20,000 approximately we had at the time, it was about 450 a year would get charged. So when we figured that out, it was like 99.5% of us never got into trouble. And a lot of that, most of it was off-duty incidents. Unfortunately, from the stress of the job, it would be a bar fight, a domestic, unfortunate DWIs. We were really impressed. But this is the dangers, and this is what management has to learn to listen to. We all know, most of us, the horrific Attica riot in 1971, 43 people died, and it was just bad decisions all around. And they learned a lot from it. But with this new liberal agenda where the officers are the bad guys and the inmates are the good guys, it's just wrong. It's just wrong. Like I said, 99.5% of us never got in trouble. You were in an institution like ours, we want to give up a couple hundred officers, and we had 2,200 inmates at the time. If there was a fight, who wins that? And they'll show you these numbers are like 2 to 1 or 4 to 1. Well, no, there's 600 officers over like 3 major shifts, but there's always 2,200 inmates on duty, incarcerated. So you can do the math there.
Right. On the last podcast that we had, we touched on exactly your point there with the staffing ratio is going up slightly instead of going down, which has been trending down, which is good. But now it's going to, we're more around the 3-to-1 ratio. But just from your point, timeline, just for number's sake, because we touched on this briefly, you and I, in the end of 1999, with correction officers, sergeants, and lieutenants, there was 22,112. And there was, at that time, when you look at inmates, there was 72,649. So if we're going to round that up, you had 22,000 security and you had 73,000 inmates. And just to show you the change is, as of September 1st, 2024, we are down to 14,334 security, and inmate population is at 39,220. So you're looking at 14,000 and 34,000 roughly, 33,589 inmates. Sorry. So you're looking at roughly 34,000 inmates and 14,000 correction officers, sergeants, and lieutenants. For correction officers, that's a 35% change from 1999.
Yes.
Go ahead, Rick. I'm sorry.
Whereas, no, you're good. I always say approximately, and it's that way. So when the scientists come to you and tell you, well, you said 32,000 and there's only 3193. Okay. But yes, and that's the dangers we face being assaulted. And you had told me one time, Vinny, I think you said you were at a sheriff's agency, and they did they had the numbers where they said a correction officer on average would get assaulted every 10 years. And believe it or not, I did 37 years and I was assaulted 3 times. So I had one coming. I was always lucky. I never got seriously injured, but they may come after me with a knife, and they may come after me with a TV. They may punch me in the jaw. And I was a good officer. Inmate was a mental health ward. He went to the hearing and he said, I don't know why I assaulted Officer Harcrow. He's a fair guy. But I did, and he actually apologized. And
Wow.
the lieutenant looked at me shocked, and I said, well, quite frankly, Lieutenant, I'm not accepting his apology, okay? Just for the record, right? And it's on the official record there.
Right.
And, we always told the officers, the biggest thing is to be alert. You could be the biggest, strongest man in the world, but if you're not paying attention, the guy comes up and cold cocks you from behind. Like you see that officer, he was just walking by, probably making a round, making sure everything's okay as required certain times. And the guy just popped out of the cell and went after him. I mean, it clearly shows the officer wasn't doing anything, because they always say the officers, agitated them somehow, which is totally, most of the time, completely untrue. And to be quite honest, there's some officers out there that do some dumb things. I'm thinking that police officer in Minnesota, and he was a senior officer, and them other 4 guys really got abused because they were all rookies. And he was kneeling on that guy's neck, which we would never happen where we work. We know better than that. You say, hey, listen, you could kill that guy. You'll be doing jail time. You'll be doing prison time if you kill an inmate illegally or unjustly or wrongly. And you should. That's why we're held to higher standards. But they've completely flipped to the other side now, this liberal agenda, like I said. So the inmate that murdered someone is a good guy, and the officer who's never been in trouble with the law comes in and tries to make a living. He's the bad guy. That's just totally untrue. That's totally false. And in New York State, as we know, they started this HALT Act, and they started before I left. I've been retired 4 years now. And I went to our superintendent, who was a sharp guy, and I told him, Superintendent, what are you going to do if an inmate stabs another inmate? You're going to put him in SHU for more than 15 days. So you're going to put him in a special housing unit for 2 weeks, not solitary confinement, right? And then you're going to put them in what they call the behavioral modification units. And as we all know, they don't work. They put them in a unit. They tell you, hey, we'll give you a TV. We'll give you a radio. We'll give you ice cream. You promise to be a good boy? Any smart inmate says, of course I will. And then he goes and does the same thing. I mean, when we pulled up figures in New York, the average inmate is shocking. Maximum, medium, and minimum, because my kids will always tell, oh, you're warped from working in that maximum security at Attica. No, maximum, medium, and minimum. Back in the day, the average inmate had 4 to 7 prior felony convictions. Think about that. 4 to 7 felonies. That's murder, manslaughter, rape, serious physical assault, stabbings, beatings. and I can't think of any other, but serious crimes. Not stealing your car, not shoplifting, not, so who are the troublesome inmates? The trouble is the inmates. And you need a secure environment for the safety of the institution. So this guy can go get locked up for 2 weeks, go to behavioral, come out at the behavioral monitor, punch an officer again, then he gets locked up for 2 weeks and then back. There needs to be a secure environment for the hardcore inmates that won't behave, in a nutshell. And even the other inmates, in New York, we talked to the inmates because we were right inside there with them, walking the beat. But we walked the beat, and they appreciate it. They would tell us, hey, when you got officers around, we know nothing's going to happen. It's all right. Because they actually told me with 37 years of service, when an inmate's fooling with your officers, he messes with us too. That's why when he screws up and you guys take him away, we don't have a problem with it. I was shocked. I had 30 years of service when the inmate told me that. I used to do the transportation. When we were out on transportation away from everybody, you could get a lot of info from them. And this HALT Act needs to be reversed because why I believe in rehabilitation for the men who want it, right? But for violent, no. They need violent inmates who are violently assaulted. They need to be in that secure environment. They need to be in that shoe. I mean, these inmates will kill their mothers, their fathers, their children, their brothers and sisters. If they would do that to their own family, what do you think correction officers are? We're just someone in their way. And a lot of the families are happy. They said, we tried everything to help the kid, but the kid won't help himself. He needs to be in prison. You remember the famous escape out of Clinton? That Matt and Sweat, and I forget the one, I think it was Matt, was the one that his family was on TV saying, we hope you find him, because he blames us for not being able to get him out of prison, just to show their mindset. And the officers deserve a lot more credit in this country. They do a damn good job. Like I said, 99.5% of them never get in trouble. That means most of them are doing their job because we know the legal rights and responsibilities that we have. And I applaud you, Vinny, for having these podcasts to teach the public, that we are the good guys.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do, is just get an awareness campaign to let people know exactly what's going on. And you hit on a very good point when you're discussing the HALT Act, is that a lot of the legislators,
individuals,
yeah. A lot of the legislators think that they're actually, did a stroke of business by instituting that, and not realizing that when they did this law, which in my opinion should have never been a law, should have been what you said, let the frontline staff, if you're going to try it, do a pilot policy instead of codifying it in law where you can't get it back. But the problem with the HALT now is that they're actually hurting the same people that they're saying that they're trying to protect. Before, there was a reason why an inmate had to go to programs or how to complete the unit. Now he knows there's 15 days of shoe. He can do that standing in his head, and there's no reason for him to complete the program. But more or less, and I just got another email yesterday touching on this exact same subject, is that it encourages the gangs now to charge for everything. So they're charging the inmates for a shower. They're charging them for just about any little thing that can go, because there's no penalty now. So the inmates know that there's no penalty. So there's less reason for them to, for lack of a better word, snitch on each other. And they know that the same inmate that's giving them a problem, as soon as they come out of, even if they do go away for the 15 days, they're going to come back. And what are they going to do? They're going to be looking for that individual once again. So there's no escape. So the same people that they're trying to help, they're actually hurting. And I think that's really missed. Besides that, the last podcast, when we got into the deep subject of the assault numbers, I mean, the assault numbers, when you look at percentages, have never been this high.
Right. You hit it right on the head, Vinny. In a nutshell, for the legislators who thought they were making the system better, I'm sorry, you were wrong. You made the system worse. Right? Listen to that again. If you thought you were making the system better, you didn't. You made it worse. And yes, criminals, when they go to prison, they do the same thing that they do on the street. If they're a burglar on the street, they're a burglar in prison. If they're assaultive on the street, they're assaultive in prison. Man, that's just the way. And you're right. The gangs, they will charge these guys for a phone call. You got to give us a pack of cigarettes. You want to use the shower, you got to give us a pack of cigarettes. And what the public don't know, you're a big tough guy. Well, they got 10 gang members that are big tough guys. And what they'll do is they'll assault you. You're not using the shower. You're not using the phone unless you pay us. And that's just reality. And so tell them there's nothing you can do about that. If you have one officer for every inmate, you still couldn't stop the gangs from running their business. Whether they assaulted them, because they know, okay, so we assault the guy, we got 30 seconds, a minute till the officers come, and then it's over. But for 30 seconds of a minute, we can do our violence. And yeah, they need to change that halt immediately. Just for the violent guys. Just for the violent guys. And put them in a secure environment. And discipline is, for some people, it's hard, but it's really easy, I tell them. If you want to stop speeding in the world, hit everybody who speeds with a $500 fine. And I can tell you two things are going to happen. You're either going to be rich and pay the $500 fine and don't care, or you're going to be poor and you're never going to speed again. You're like, oh, it ain't worth $500 for what I make. Oh, no, I'll just drive the limit from now on. The same thing with violence in prison. If you put them guys and these career criminals, like I said, most of them are career criminals. They've been arrested thousands of times. Like we said, New York State, 4 to 7 prior felonies. That's horrible. That's terrific. That's terrible. Horrific. And I got a real issue with them reporting the crime rate is down, because I know in New York City and New York State, we've let out the 40,000. And my friends in New York, and I have plenty of them in New York City, live all over. Manhattan, Queens, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island. And they tell me, Rick, it's almost like the movie Escape from New York now. They're telling me, and I didn't know this till recently, some law enforcement guy told me, there is no federal requirement that the state must report the crimes to the Justice Department. So they just don't report. So if you look at numbers that we're not reporting now, it looks like there's less crime. But if you're not reporting them, how do we know is there less crime? And I don't believe it's true. I believe they're misleading the public. I would love to see a statute that says they have to report every crime that happens. Because with 40,000 career criminals walking around, I had a friend of mine, daughter's an art student. She was down in New York, living a good life in the city. Went to this art school. She's a fantastic artist. She can draw you in 5 minutes, your house, whatever. She's standing out, waiting for an Uber in a nice neighborhood, looking at a phone. One of them criminals, who we call haters, just walked up, punched her in the head for no reason. Luckily, she wasn't seriously injured. And her parents told her from Buffalo, you got to come home. And the daughter had lived there 7, 8 years, going to college and afterward. And she said, yeah, I love the city, but yeah, she had to come back home. You know, and you see the crime. Where would you ever see gang members, especially illegal immigrants, attack a couple NYPD in the middle of Times Square in the middle of the day? Never. That's anarchy. And then I'm not sure, but from what I read the reports, they let them go. How could you let them go after assaulting a police officer? If they're going to assault a police officer, here's what they don't get. Someone who's licensed to carry a gun and protect us, right? You're going to assault them. Then what would stop you from attacking an unlicensed, an unprotected, unarmed citizen? Nothing. And we need a safe society for all of us. How about all of us? I love New York City. I love to hang out there. I tell my wife likes to go there shopping and stuff. I tell her and her girlfriends don't go there no more, because you could be walking down the street minding your own business. There was the one with the nurse. Nurse was walking down the street. The guy grabbed her purse, knocked her to the ground. She's got a traumatic brain injury. You know, they don't follow up. Who knows if this woman will ever be? And that's what we're dealing with. What about our right to live in a safe society? And probably 95% of people are good, but we got 5% causing havoc. So we got to live like a third world country. And that's the problem with some of these gang members from these third world countries. They don't live up to our culture. They bring their culture to us. And that's what some of these liberals don't understand. And that's what they can't understand why we're so focused on crime, especially law enforcement. I don't want to see anybody get hurt. I don't want your kid to get hurt. I don't want my kid to get hurt. Well, don't you understand? And if you make them pay that price, the problem with this country is we're soft. And I don't want to be harsh, but if you hit a guy the first time he spray painted a car with about a year's cleaning up the neighborhood, he might think twice about spraying another car.
Yeah, I mean, the whole society as a whole, I mean, that's a whole different subject.
Upside down.
The bail reform, since there's arguments on both sides, whether that's working or not. I would disagree that it's working, but the legislators would tell us otherwise with their statistics. But between the whole society, as far as the mentality, would it's the defund the police, anti-police,
Right.
anti-authority, and it's just trickled down. And as you can see it, that you said it correctly, is that inside the jail is a microcosm of what's going on outside. It's no different. And if they believe
Absolutely.
there's no rules on the outside, and they see that there's absolutely no rules or no severe penalty on the inside, what did you think was going to happen?
Right. If you don't make people pay the price, then they won't. Something has to deter you to stop your violent actions. Someone needs to stand up there and say, stop the violence.
Just stop the madness. And then
Right.
you trickle that down, and they wonder why they have a recruiting problem. And obviously it's not just in corrections, it's all in law enforcement that's having a recruiting issue. But you can't badmouth law enforcement for years, the last 3.5 years, 4 years or more, and then think that everything is peachy and there are no issues. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so actually, if you look at New York City, because that's the biggest city quiet. And my little guard dog over here. Hey,
at least you're being protected.
If you look at New York City in the 70s, it was bad. And then I don't want to use the mayor's name, but the mayor came in and had a quality of life agenda, and he cleaned up the guys from doing the squeegees and the assaults and and he cleaned the city up, and it was pretty nice. People go down there, you could have a good time, you could eat, they have a problem. Then he went back to the liberal agenda, the bail reform and all that, and you're letting guys out who just committed a crime with a gun in his hand or assaulted. How do they not stay in prison? At least let them stay there for a month, a year, something to kind of curb their violence, right? And now you got it always swings the pendulum left or right. Now you're way too far to the left, right? We the general public have a right to live in a safe and secure society. That's what someone will understand. I don't want anybody getting. I mean, even look, and I want to commit. But was Pelosi's husband getting hit in the head with a hammer? I mean, when it hits you at home, that's a problem with most Americans. If it really doesn't affect me, I'm really not too concerned about it. But once they do get affected, then they say, why don't someone do something? But it shouldn't be like that. We should all be concerned. I always say to my friends and my colleagues, I want you to look at that criminal and that poor public person as if it was your sister or your mother or your father or your brother, right? If somebody punched your sister in the head and seriously injured her, would you want them locked up? Of course you would. So that is punishment. Well, yeah, there's a little punishment there, let's be honest. But it's a deterrent so it doesn't go out and do it to someone else. I don't want to see anybody else. I don't want your kid to get hurt or mine.
No,
that's what needs to change. To hold people accountable for their actions.
And there is no accountability. And there's also no accountability with the people that are making the decisions, whether it be the legislators that come up with the laws. There's no repercussions when their policies don't work. And obviously they're much quicker to install their policies than they are to repeal their policies. And then you have an agency, docs, and I pick on docs a lot, but it's because they're so antiquated in their ways that you know, and you know better than I, you were in the department for a lot longer than myself, is that when you have a system so antiquated and unwilling to change, and those people are the same ones that are getting promoted and lead the agencies and had, you know, many positions throughout the years, and you wonder why things are the way that they are. And I've used this adage, you know, over and over again, and probably said it every podcast, and I'll probably say it again, is you cannot have the people that created the problems be the ones in charge of solving the problems.
Right. The problem today is you get people on TV, they're experts, right? Everybody's an expert. And so, okay, well, you find out they're not experts. You have civilians running a police agency, a law enforcement agency, and they don't understand what's acceptable. You know, in this system, our system is a great system. You're supposed to be judged by your peers. You need a police chief running that. You need a sheriff running the corrections department. You don't need a motor vehicle clerk. You don't need a business administrator. You need someone who's directly seasoned from law enforcement, because they know what's norm and what's not normal, what's acceptable and what's not. You know, someone says you shouldn't use force on a person. Absolutely. Nobody should. But if you're in a law enforcement role, you're a police officer, you're a correction officer, and the inmate is assaulting another inmate or another staff member, you're required by law. That's the police motto, to protect the serf, to stop them actions. So you have to use force. You can go up to them, hey, please stop punching them. Please stop punching them. And how many times we were taught in the DOC, first thing you do, verbal orders. Stop fighting, stop fighting. They don't stop fighting. So what's the next step? You have to get in there and get a hold of them. Now, you modern, you use pepper spray. Sometimes that doesn't work on them. Now you got to get physical with them, right? That's not wrong. That's reality. And I always told our officers, you know, you protect yourself. You're here to earn a living, not to get assaulted, not to get injured. These poor officers get killed in the line of duty, whether they're correction officers or police officers. What do? They hold a little ceremony. They give them a flag, 10 minutes, say, hey, we're sorry. Rick was a great guy, but we have to go back to work now. And you give them a little compensation. Some agencies don't even do that. I mean, that's appalling. That's appalling. And that people should, it's just as humane for an inmate as it is for an officer, right? We should be safe for all of us. And that's what most of us correction officers try to do everywhere I've been. Maximum, medium, and minimum. They do a damn good job, and they really deserve accolades. And they do deserve top pay, and they do deserve the top benefits. Like we used to say, before you judge a man, walk in there. I used to tell the guy, you don't know how it is. I said, it's nothing like in the movies. Let me get the superintendent. Let me get a commissioner. I want you to walk into a place like Attica or a medium. Well, we always said the maximum. I said, hey, a medium, I worked a medium for 2 years. I didn't like it. I went back. They couldn't believe you're going back to a max. I said, I'm sitting in a dormitory with 60 guys all by myself. This is not a good system. And I don't care who says it is. If the commissioner comes out today and he's sharp, I'm going to tell him it's not a good system. In a tough neighborhood, cops always had two partners. There was always two of them to have a backup. I don't know why corrections, they think you could put yourself in, you know, all you are is a security guard. I tell the guys, you be a security guard. All you got to do is call it in. What are you going to do, one man, when 20 of them start fighting? You call it in security area. That's the best you can. And protect yourself, right? It's not like the movies. In the movies, the bad movies, right? They drag them out. They beat them up. And one senator one time told me, well, Shawshank, that was the real one, right? Remember the crazy captain pulled the guys out, beat them to death? All the inmates are watching quiet. I said, if that was reality, they would start throwing everything they had in their cells, cans, bottles, books, whatever they got, water, trash, started fires, banging on the doors. And then when they opened up them doors, whoever was dumb enough to assault that guy, he'd be lucky if they just beat him. If he was unlucky, they'd kill him. That's reality. That stuff never happens. That's total movie fabrication. I just want to state that for the record. Some people actually believe that. But
well, they do. They don't see another side. You're right.
The solitary confinement was the same thing. We don't have that in New York. It's a special housing unit. It's the same cell in general population as it is in And shame on people for not exposing that to them, right? They should have showed them. They should bring them in there with a TV camera and show. And the reason we lock guys up in special housing because they would stab somebody, they would break somebody's jaw, they would throw somebody down the stairs, they would start a fire. We had all that in Attica, disturbances. And we had the one incident, I forget it was, they stabbed 5 of our officers. And one of them was one of our friends, and I'm not mentioning no names for confidential. And the guy just said, I don't like the way things are around here. They stabbed 5 of our friends, and luckily they were serious, but non-life threatening. And then in 2000, we had an inmate had I think it was around 99 or 2000. Don't quote me on the date. Inmate had an aneurysm in the yard. We had a good crew there. They took the guy down and they took him to the special housing unit, and he died a couple days later. Well, the inmates thought that we beat him to death, quite frankly. Of course, nothing was the truth. And he had an aneurysm, and he died in a shoe cell. Well, that weekend, I believe it was, they went out to the yard and they had a plan. And they burned down 4 of our yard platforms, and they broke all kinds of windows. And the department reported minimal damage. Well, superintendent later told me, Rick, that was $1 million worth of damage. They broke every window at all 4 yards. They burned down the shower rooms in the yard, and they burned down the officer's platform, I believe, at all 4 yards. $1 million worth of damage. So, but to end the podcast, the officers are the good guys, and they do a damn good job. Nobody gets abused. Never where I was in my 37-year career. And they need to change that HALT Act. They need to put the violent inmates in the special housing unit so the rest of the inmates can do their time in peace as best we can. And thanks again for...
Yeah, no, that's what we're trying to make the awareness. And maybe that is a good point that I never thought of before is no one's ever done a video that I know of an actual shoe. We did years ago, if you remember, the double bunk cell that was set up in the legislative office building in Albany. They had that was part of that when we made that. That was actually the legislative director at the time, Chris Leo, built that, and that was a big hit to show the size and the 2 inmates living in there. And yet they are okay with the double bunk cell, but they're, a shoe cell is larger, and obviously with the exception of the shoe 200s, which were built specifically for 2 men into a cell. So it was a larger shell with a shower actually in it. But that would be a very good idea, is the actual show a shoe cell and what goes on in the special housing unit, and a full day of the programs and services that they get, which are more that's afforded than to general population. And if people would have did their homework, I think on that specifically, maybe the HALT Act would have gotten a second look before it got implemented. Go ahead, Rick. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. Because people are visual, that cell in the legislature, which was an excellent idea by Chris, excellent, because you get to see it. But for the rest of us, the general public, when you sway public perception, no, we're visual. We like the TV. We like the audio, the video. So you can actually see. And that's what they should show. There is no difference. There is no difference between the general population cell. And I get mad at these politicians that play politics. And I'm not talking about elected officials. I'm talking about politicians. They're in cages. They're not cages. A cage at the zoo, you see the tiger in there, and they throw their food in there, and they're sitting on a little lump of concrete. No, a cell has a toilet, running water, has a bed, has usually a locker. They can have books, they can have a radio, they can have TV, they can have food, they have a little hot pot that they use to cook. So it's not a cage. It's like a little room. That's
now they get a tablet and a computer
room. Yeah, now you have a tablet. I left before the tablets came, but yes. So say that again for the public. They have a TV, they have a radio, they have a toilet, they have water, they have a bed, They usually have a desk or a locker of some kind that they can use. And they have personal property, food and clothing, in addition to their prison wear that they wear. So,
Yeah, I mean, I remember doing a college paper when I was out and still doing studies while in corrections. And one of the papers, the instructor couldn't believe the paper that I did was about prison, and it was comparing prison to the amenities and the services that they had that we don't even afford to our geriatric population.
yes, our senior citizens, absolutely.
Yeah, of retirement homes. And it's like, the retirement people don't get the services that happens. And they're like, well, you have to be truthful. And I'm like, tell me something in that paper that isn't truthful. I said, I can back up everything that I said in there. And I did, because it was just a shock, because she didn't know, and she was an excellent instructor. And we went on to write other papers together, or she corrected my papers, I should say, as my editor. But it was just goes to show you that, here it is, somebody that looked at the paper and sitting there in words, and was many pages, and they're just looking at this like, and it's true, and they're looking at, well, this isn't reality. And it's like, it is reality, something that we live and breathe every day that the general public just doesn't understand.
I'm no liberal. I consider myself a conservative Democrat, right? But I've always voted for the best man. And I lean a little bit to the right. But we run, in New York State and most of the country I've seen, we run a very humane system. Very humane. It was amazing to me that we ran it as good as we did with the violent population that we have. I really was. We had some good staff. We had some good managers. We had some good superintendents. Unfortunately, when politics get involved, especially today, I've never seen this country so divided, probably since the beginning of our country 200 some years ago, right? When we broke away from the mother country. But these officers, even the managers, even the commissioners, I used to tell the commissioner that we didn't always agree. They called me a radical, some people, but I wasn't a radical. I was just doing my job, right? If there's a problem that needs to be fixed, if we can't have an honest conversation, then we shouldn't be having a conversation, right? I told them, listen to your staff. They're good people. And we had good superintendents, and we had good captains, and we had good sergeants and lieutenants and officers. A lot today is with these young staff. When I started in 1984, 83, a sergeant had 25 years on the job and was 50 years old. So you'd go to him with an issue, say, hey, boss, what do we do about this, that, and the other thing? And he'd say, oh, you're good, guy. Just do this, this, and this, and you'll be all right. That's how we done it. And we were always taught to be firm, fair, and consistent in New York. And that's the one policy I agree with. We always told the officers, you give them everything they got coming, and you usually won't have a problem. Thank God. And we did. And we did, whether it was a medium, minimum, maximum security. Some officers did a fine job. Like I said, 99.5% of them, that's almost all of them, never got in trouble. So when these people say that, there's these urban legends out there that they're all bad and they're all, troublemakers. Well, the statistics, which the educated people, and I value higher education, will show you. Problem with statistics is you can play the numbers, make us look good or make us look bad. I don't care who you are. But I'm telling you, and most of us were good. And I was proud to be a correction officer. Some officers get down on them because of the high stress environment. And I tell them, hey, you're working one of the toughest beats in the nation. Be proud of what you do, and you do it well.
And that's one of the things that I wanted to hit on before we end. Well, 2 points. One, we'll get into the incident that just happened yesterday at Collins. Another officer was exposed to a toxic substance. So when I retired, we didn't have the fentanyl poisoning or the type of papers that were, they might have been loaded with some synthetic marijuana, but we didn't have the falling out or the toxic reactions that we're having today. And Collins had an exposure yesterday in D block. They locked it down on side 2. And luckily this time the administration and everyone, they followed the proper protocols and did the right thing. And we didn't have that when I retired. We didn't have that. But one of the things that you see that's happening now, and it kind of breaks my heart. But I know that there's a staffing problem, and everybody is, to me, you should never belittle somebody for wanting their time off. But the unity in the officers, like when I first got in, we would make fun of each other, but that was the way of getting through the day. But there was always the unity. At the end of the day, you were my brother, and if we were going down, we were going down together.
Absolutely.
Now, because of the way that the policies are instilled, and people are actually getting pitted against each other because of docs, and it's because of their policies that are dividing the officers between themselves. And as just stated in another way, as far as the formation of the country, a house divided, cannot stand. And it just rips me apart right now as far as the unity that was once there in the department. I just don't see right now. And I see it, whether it's social media or people at some of the places that I've gone to, and, this guy does that or this person does that. And it's like, we're always not going to agree with management. I get that, but it doesn't make either side wrong, but that's how you come to an agreement and you solve the problems. But beating up on each other and the unity, today, it bothers me.
Wrong. Right. No, you're right. Yeah, I butted head with management a few times because they were unreasonable at times. And it's well documented. If you Google my name, you'll see I had a professional public relations firm that I used, and they were top shelf, and they put it all out there. And even the manager were, at the end of the day, the good ones, most of them would say, Rick, at least we know what we're on the same page. I said, hey, I would tell them all the time, we're trying to make the system better. We're not trying to make a name for myself or anything. And the officers, you have to be unified. You have to. That was what they taught us in the academy years ago, is that the inmates don't have a plan. Thank God we have a plan, which is to stick together and run a safe and secure facility. So we all go home the same way we came in. That's the CO motto. You got 2 holes on the way in. You want to go home with 2 holes on the way out. No more, no less. It's a tough business. And that's why I always said, I told the commissioner, it's a tough business for the commissioner all the way down to the new jack. The problem is the new jack's the one, they call it about risk management. I said, right, you have to manage. The problem is management never takes the risk. Then poor officers do. Now, I carried a baton for 37 years, and some people would question that, and some agencies don't. And I said, well, what are you going to do if a guy pulls a knife out, a homemade knife, a shiv, right? Or a razor blade? I got to get cut? Because none of us are Steven Seagal. I always tell them the movies. I love the movie. Steven Seagal is a movie. Now, he may have trained himself, but he's not invincible. If he would, wouldn't he be the #1 fighter in the world? Wouldn't he be on the MMA or the UFC or boxing? Right? That's fake. And the guy who hits you with a razor, I don't care how good you are, you're getting cut. And they don't want to. I say, hey, you have to have provisions to make it safe for us, the correctional staff. And look, we could go back to the National Law Officers Memorial. They critique all the officers' deaths. And there's a couple other corrections groups. You should go on there. There was that one in North Carolina a couple of years. It was the officer had time on the job, and he was with the nurse. And these 2 inmates got down to the hospital with some equipment, so they were maintenance, they were gonna fix something. And they end up, I believe, killing both the nurse and the hospital, tried to escape. Because they said when an inmate escapes, the old timers told us that's the most dangerous time for a correction officer. When an inmate escapes, he'll do whatever it takes to get out. And you see numerous times when they escape, they shoot them, they stab them. It was North Carolina. Then they had the other one, they had the trustee. I think it was another one in the Carolinas. Don't quote me on the state, where he was out cutting the lawn, and then he killed the poor administrator who was home and one of the houses outside. I don't know why these administrators would ever live outside of them prisons, especially with them inmates on the grounds. No, but we had that one in New York, and the one guy was from Rochester. I won't use his name. He was in Attica for 30 years, and one of the superintendents was a sharp guy. Said, yeah, he looks like he'd be a good fit. He killed I believe his mother and his grandmother. And then he got out after 30 years, and he started a fire, and he ended up killing his sister, I believe, in Rochester. And then when the firemen showed up, he fired off rounds at the firemen. I don't know if he hit them or not. And I think he then killed himself. So here's a guy that went to prison for 30 years and never learned. And that's what some of these liberals don't get. There's bad people in this world who need to be in a secure environment for the safety for the rest of us. And I don't mean COs, I mean all of society, including the COs.
Right.
That's the whole point of your podcast is the officers, the staff are good people. And unfortunately, violent inmates are not. Like I said, when they would kill their own parents and their own brothers and sisters and their own children, what do you do? Some of the people, you know what, then they're out there, they want to close every prison.
Yeah.
I've read these people say that there shouldn't be any prisons. So I asked them, would a guy like Hitler, who killed what, 6 million people? And I don't have the approximate number, right? He didn't kill just the poor Jewish people. He killed the Polish people and the Russians and everyone else who was involved. And God bless them all. Would you put him in prison? Or are you going to send him to a behavior modification unit? That doesn't work. That's what they need to know. That's what they need to know. That's why we have prisons, to keep violent, extremist people secure so we have a safe society for all of us.
Yeah, and that's obviously what we're advocating for is the health and safety of the correction officer and those that work inside the walls. I mean, not one of the people that are working or the employees, they don't put the people in prison. I mean, they chose that as a profession and career, whether it be civilian or security, but they didn't put the people into prison. And you've said it a couple times throughout this podcast, is they deserve to go home the same way that they came in. And I think that's what's being missed right now. I mean, the governor, has made one remark to date, I think since the beginning of June, and now we're almost to the beginning of October, and we haven't heard anything from her as far as the health and safety. I mean, the officers, not only are the assaults unacceptable, but just the working conditions alone, where they're not able to spend time with their families and they're working doubles and triples and spending more time at the facilities than they are in their own homes where they're paying the mortgage, and nobody's going to bat for them. I mean, something has to change, and turning a blind eye to it isn't going to solve the problem.
No, and these poor officers, like you said, that's a good point. With the short staffing, I read that they're mandating them to work crazy overtime. Like, I worked all the overtime I could as a police officer. Most of us, correction officers, do. We have to work a lot of overtime to make a decent living, and they're getting stuck 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week. You can't stick people like that. Furthermore, it's unhealthy. I told a few friends, you should find a doctor. In the Japanese culture, in the 80s, when the times were tough, remember back then, that's when I got into corrections, because you couldn't find a job anywhere else. It was either leave the Western New York area, and this job paid up. And my father got arrested, so said, hey, son, I don't know if you're interested. And I said, I'll try it. The jobs were so bad, I was signing up for everything. The post office, the mailman, every civil service job there was, university system. And I got hired on. But in the Japanese culture in the 80s, when they were, the motto was, you're lucky you have a job, just keep working, right? Shut your mouth. They had these executives dying in their 40s in the prime of life in good health. And they couldn't understand. Well, these guys were working like 22 hours a day, 3-4 days in a row, weeks in a row. And they actually had a term, and I don't know what the term is. They were having like heart attacks and dying, that they actually had to go to these corporations and say, you can't work these guys like that. You were actually working them to death. And myself, I was working all kinds of overtime the last 3 years. And I was at the outside hospital, and I had worked 3 nights in a row, like 14, 16 hours. I had gotten a couple hours of sleep, 3-4 hours for like 3-4 nights in a row. I got to work that day. I'm in the hospital. I started sweating profusely. And the guy said, Ricky, you having a heart attack? You all right? And I said, no, man, I think I got the flu or something. I should have stayed home, And a couple of the EMT COs who were EMT said, Rick, you might be having a heart attack. And I said, no, I got to go to heart. I know that ain't the problem. I had to call the boss and ask for relief. And they took me up to the ER. And the doctor told me, officer, what have you been doing? I said, oh, doc, I worked crazy shifts the last 3 nights in a row. I've only had 3 hours. I've had like 9 hours of sleep in 3 or 4 days. And he said, kid, you're dehydrated. Are you trying to kill yourself? You can't work like that, officer. you'll kill yourself. And sat in the ER for the day, fed me up with fluids. And I'll say, these poor guys, if you're working 16 hours and you have to drive an hour or two home, and then you drive an hour or two back, what are you getting? 3-4 hours of sleep? You can't do that 3-4.
It's just not healthy.
No, you actually kill yourself. You know, and somebody should write that report and show that to docs and say, hey, if somebody dies, that's on you then.
Right. I believe that report was brought up to my knowledge, where it went. But yeah, that's a very strong point. You're basically, you know, outside of the assaults and everything else that's happened, just with the mandatory overtime and the working conditions are stressful enough. Now you're adding no sleep and spending all that time on work. You're literally killing your employees health-wise.
Right. And just for the record, like you said, you know, some people call these guys whiners or something. But if you're actually stating a serious problem you want to fix, I don't consider that a whiner. But I worked 37 years on a career that I only had to do 25. So I worked 12 extra years. So if somebody's, oh, this guy's just whining about his career, I could have left 12 years earlier. Unfortunately, we didn't make the money that we did. So I'm no whiner. I'm just describing the realities of it. You know, you have to get them guys some relief. 2-3 days a week was enough for me overtime. Anything more than that, I didn't want it. And I like to work all the overtime I could because I could give my family a decent life.
Right. Yeah. Walking out the door, I wanted to do more. And now it's the opposite is happening, is that they're doing too much. And not by choice. It's one thing if you choose it, though that's debatable, but to being forced upon you when you can't even get your children off the bus,
right?
And lack of sleep, and you're not asking for it, that creates a bad home life all the way around. Let alone driving home from work.
Right. And there's been numerous reports of guys having accidents on the way home. And I know I used to work the day shift or the afternoon shift, and every once in a while I wouldn't work the midnight shift even for money. For overtime, and they laughed. The boss was, Rick, you don't want overtime on the night shift? I can't stay awake. You'll find me in a chair with a pillow and a blanket. And every once in a while I'd get stuck. And I remember one time I had to drive home and the sun is in my eyes. It's warm. I actually had to pull over after the double shift. It was the worst. The day shift to the afternoon shift wasn't bad working, but the afternoon shift in the morning just killed me. I actually had to pull over the parking lot in the supermarket and went to sleep for about 15, 20 minutes. And then I woke up and drove home because I was ready to go off the road. I was catching myself and I'm like, oh, geez, I actually had to stop.
Right.
I lived about 45 an hour from the prison. So, yeah, I understand what the officers are talking about. That's just unnecessary.
Sad.
That needs to be rectified, yeah.
Well, with any help, we're going to help and try to advocate for change. It's all we can do at this point.
I commend you for doing this, and hopefully it goes somewhere, and maybe me and you will do a couple more interviews with someone somewhere, because them correction officers and all the staff, nurses, doctors, everybody forgets about all them teachers that are all in there. You know, unfortunately, we got to be there 24/7, 365. That's what we always used to tell the rookies. Like, can't we just close? No, it's not a factory. It's not a supermarket. We just can't lock the doors. There's, 1,000 inmates here, 500 inmates, 2,000 inmates here that need to be taken care of. So, no, it's us. We're like Marines, whether we like it or not. We got duty to do. Hoorah.
Oh, I love it.
Right.
I love it.
Good job, Vin.
All right. Well, thank you, Rick. I would appreciate you spending over an hour of your time and taking up your day. Sorry about that, but I do appreciate the time that you spent with us. And I'm sure that if you're welcome to it, we'd love to have you on again.
Sure. I appreciate it. 37 years of experience, 25 years of experience. That's a lot. We got, believe it or not, we have most of the answers. They may not like them, but they're the answers.
That's the problem, trying to get somebody to listen.
Right. All right, my brother.
All right, Rick, thank you. You too.
Right.
Thank you again.
Good night.
Good night.
Good day.
All right, everyone. I want to take a special thanks to Rick Harcrow for spending over an hour with us. So hopefully you've gained some insight on his knowledge and his stories. He's always good for a couple good stories every time we talk. So we want to give our thoughts. Like I said, we just had recently the incident at Collins, and there's more incidents at Fishkill, all over through the state. There's been a vast rise in assaults and incarcerated individual assaults on each other. So we just want to make sure that everyone knows that we're thinking about them and being safe, and you're not forgotten, even though you are behind the walls. As Rick said, that we are still thinking and trying to advocate for you on your behalf. So I hope you appreciated today's episode, and remember to be kind. You never know what the person next to you is going through. And I always like to end on that note, but I wanted to everybody to be safe. And thank you for spending an hour of your time with the Working in Hell podcast. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
You've been listening to the Working in Hell podcast with Vinny Blasio. Find this podcast on any of your favorite platforms like Audible, iHeart, and Spotify. And be sure to check out www.workinginhell.com for more information and important links. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.